They erased me as if I had never existed. One morning, I walked through the grand hallway of my husband's mansion and noticed the family portraits. My wedding picture, the one where I stood proudly beside him, was gone. In its place, the same photograph, but my face had been replaced with someone else's. I laughed at first, thinking it was a cruel joke. But then I scrolled through his mother's Facebook page. Every album, every memory, every holiday photo, my image was missing. And in that silence, I realized they weren't just erasing me. They were rewriting history. The first weeks of marriage felt like a dream stitched in silk and champagne. I had married into one of the most respected families in Boston, a dynasty that prided itself on tradition and legacy. The Millers had money carved into their veins, their names etched onto buildings, and their reputation polished over generations. I told myself I had stepped into a world I was lucky to join, a place where stability and belonging would finally cradle me. For a while, I let myself believe it. The house itself was a museum of legacy. Gilded frames lined the hallways, each portrait chronicling their climb from old money to modern power. My wedding portrait had been hung with care in the central hallway. I remembered pausing in front of it the day after we returned from our honeymoon, a soft smile touching my lips. There I was, Jessica Miller, the new wife, standing beside my husband with a veil glowing under chandelier light. For a fleeting moment, I thought, I belong here. But the illusion cracked faster than I could prepare for. Weeks later, I noticed something strange as I walked past the hallway again. The same frame hung in the same place, but my image was gone. In my place stood another woman, her face seamlessly merged into the scene. A stranger's features pressed against my husband's arm, as if she had always belonged there. The artistry was disturbingly flawless, a deep fake so precise that even the texture of her smile blended with the shadows of the photograph. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. At first, I laughed quietly, convincing myself it was a prank, perhaps orchestrated by my sister-in-law who had always eyed me with cold amusement. But the laughter died when I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my mother-in-law's Facebook page. There it was again. Every family picture had been re-uploaded with the same alteration. My face was missing. Holidays, birthdays, dinners, frames of life in which I had existed now showed someone else. It wasn't just one picture. It was all of them. The comments beneath the photos stung sharper than any blade. Such a beautiful family. Your son's wife is stunning. And every heart reaction pulsed like a reminder. They didn't mean me. Not once was my name mentioned. It was as though I had been erased and substituted in the eyes of the world. I tried to confront my husband that evening, but he brushed it off with a laugh. You're imagining things, Jess. My mom just loves editing photos. You know how she is. His arm around me felt more like a chain than comfort. I wanted to believe him, but the tightness in his smile told me he was lying. The days that followed made the silence heavier. At family dinners, conversations skipped over me as though my chair were empty. When I tried to contribute, their eyes flicked past mine like I was invisible. My sister-in-law leaned close once, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "You were never really one of us." The words clung to me long after she pulled away, like smoke in my lungs. I told myself not to crumble. Not yet. One evening, curiosity, or maybe desperation, pushed me deeper. In the study, while my husband showered, I sat at his family's computer. I shouldn't have opened the files, but instinct guided me. There, buried in their digital archives, was the family tree. My name wasn't there. Not just absent, but deliberately replaced. The digital line stretched backward through generations, but where Jessica Miller should have appeared, it was blank. A silent void where I had once existed. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. Notes were attached to my profile. Temporary. Outsider. Not legacy material. The words felt clinical, detached, as if I were an object under review. My throat burned with humiliation. The whispers grew louder after that. In corridors, over glasses of wine, between bites of dessert. She doesn't fit. She won't last. She's just a passenger. They didn't even try to hide it anymore. My presence was tolerated, nothing more. But the final blow came late at night, in the form of an anonymous email. The subject line was chilling in its simplicity. Confidential. I opened it with hesitant fingers, my heart pounding against my ribs. The message inside was short, typed with precision. Erase her completely before the shareholders' gala. I stared at the screen, a hollow ache spreading through me. Erase me. Not just from photographs or family gatherings, but from their entire narrative. It was no longer about petty cruelty. This was deliberate, calculated, and dangerous. They weren't just removing me, they were rewriting history. And for the first time since I entered this family, I understood. I was not living in a paradise. I was trapped inside a game where my very existence had become negotiable. Silence became my shield. After that email, I knew any attempt to fight openly would be crushed before I even had a chance to speak. So I withdrew, shrinking into the role they had written for me, the quiet, overlooked wife. At dinners, I smiled faintly and nodded when spoken to. At social gatherings, I lingered at the edges like an ornament no one bothered to notice. Outwardly, I became exactly what they wanted me to be, invisible. But invisibility is a dangerous disguise. While they dismissed me as harmless, I was learning. I had slipped tiny cameras into corners of the house, recording conversations when they believed no one was listening. I saved every file, every cruel remark. And one night, while pouring tea for my mother-in-law, I caught the sharpness of her tongue in its purest form. "She's nothing but a housemaid with a certificate," she scoffed to her daughter. "A name on paper, nothing more. Once she's gone, it will be as if she never existed." The words stung, but I kept my face neutral, steadying my hands on the teapot. Inside, however, I felt the spark of something dangerous, rage sharpening into purpose. The recordings piled up. Their disdain was endless, their arrogance unfiltered. My sister-in-law boasted about how easy it was to edit me out of family pictures. My husband's voice joined theirs, colder than I had ever heard it, suggesting they should fast-track the process before she complicates things. I stored everything in encrypted folders. Every whisper became a weapon. Then one morning, an envelope arrived at the gate, addressed only with my name. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note scrawled in hurried ink. "I can help you." My heart tightened as I plugged it into my laptop. The drive contained a single file, a copy of one of my recordings, the very one where my mother-in-law called me a housemaid. But this version had been cleaned, enhanced, made suitable for broadcast. Whoever had sent it was watching me, but not as an enemy. They wanted me to fight. For the first time, I felt a sliver of power. Someone on the outside had seen through the facade, and now I wasn't entirely alone. I waited, I listened, I gathered. But secrets can only remain hidden for so long. And soon, it was time to reveal who I really was. The Millers had always believed I was beneath them, a charity case plucked into their world. What they didn't know was that before marriage, I had built a career they could never imagine. I wasn't just a decorative wife. I had been a financial strategist, consulting for some of the most ambitious startups in Silicon Valley. And years ago, I had taken a risk, investing in a small AI company dedicated to fighting deep fake technology. Back then, my husband had laughed when I told him, "No one cares about that nonsense, Jess. It's a fad. You'll lose everything." His family had echoed the sentiment, sneering at the idea of wasting money on digital paranoia. But I hadn't listened. Something in me had recognized the storm before it came. Now that same company was no longer a fledgling idea, but a rising force in cybersecurity. Its software was being tested by law enforcement agencies, its value growing exponentially as the world woke up to the dangers of manipulated identity. And quietly, I still held a significant stake in it. I began reaching out to old contacts, people who remembered me not as Jessica the wife, but Jessica the strategist. Their voices carried respect, not pity. "Where have you been hiding?" they asked. I smiled at the irony. Hiding was exactly what I had been doing, but not in the way they thought. Then came the announcement. My company had signed a deal with a global security conglomerate, one of the largest in the world. Overnight, headlines screamed about the partnership. Guardian AI joins forces with Titan Secure. Stock prices soared, and with them, so did my name, buried deep within shareholder records. I watched the numbers climb, zero after zero, until the figures became almost surreal. What had once been dismissed as a childish investment was now worth more than the Miller fortune itself. That night, as my husband toasted with his family in the dining room, laughing about a new business contract, my phone vibrated with the alert. The company's valuation had doubled within hours. I stared at the screen, my reflection glowing in the glass. The irony was delicious. They had tried to erase me with deep fakes, with digital silence, with whispered insults. But it was the very technology they mocked that now gave me the sharpest weapon. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My arsenal was loaded and the first shot had already been fired. It is easy to underestimate someone who pretends to be broken. After the news of my company's soaring valuation, I didn't flaunt my success. Instead, I deliberately let myself appear worn, distracted, and uncertain. At family gatherings, I fumbled with words, let my shoulders slump, allowed their ridicule to wash over me as though it pierced my skin. My husband smirked at me with the smugness of a victor who thought the war was already won. "She's fragile," I overheard him tell his sister. "She won't last a year in this family." That was exactly what I wanted him to believe. Behind the facade of weakness, my moves were precise, calculated. I had begun to trace the veins of the Miller empire, the holding companies, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts. They prided themselves on complexity, but complexity can be unwound with patience. Through discrete funds and intermediaries, I started buying small slivers of their empire, pieces so minor they went unnoticed. 1% here, 3% there, quietly stitched together until they formed something larger, something dangerous. Every time I signed another contract through an anonymous trust, I felt the quiet thrill of control shifting beneath their feet. It was not revenge fueled by rage, it was strategy. A long game they could not imagine I had the discipline to play. The night before the shareholders' meeting, I barely slept. I sat at my desk with spreadsheets glowing across the screen, my name hidden behind layers of corporate anonymity. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, calm and cold. For weeks, I had been waiting for this exact moment. The boardroom was a theater of power, heavy with the scent of cigars and arrogance. The patriarch, my father-in-law, began the meeting with the same pompous tone he had always used, announcing projected growth and acquisitions. My husband leaned back confidently, fingers drumming against the polished table. They believed the world belonged to them, untouchable and eternal. Then the screen at the front lit up with the updated shareholder registry. Names scrolled down in tidy rows, numbers beside them. Their laughter quieted when the list paused, revealing a new entry. J. Miller, 25% shares. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My husband sat forward, blinking as if he'd misread. My sister-in-law muttered something under her breath. My father-in-law's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around the edge of the table. And I, sitting calmly at the far end, folded my hands together and simply watched. "Who the hell is J. Miller?" one of the executives demanded. I let the question linger, savoring the electricity in the air. Then I smiled, a small deliberate curve of my lips. That would be me. The eruption was immediate. Voices overlapped, accusations flew. My husband turned on me with wide eyes, betrayal dripping from his expression. But what could he accuse me of? I had done nothing illegal. I had simply played their own game better than they ever imagined I could. The boardroom became a battlefield, and for the first time, I was not the one cornered. But the Millers were not a family that surrendered easily. Within days, the counterattack began. Hashtags bloomed across social media like poisonous flowers. See Gold Digger Jessica, you need not a Miller, fake wife. On TikTok, videos mocked me. Clips spliced together to paint me as desperate and manipulative. Twitter threads dissected my past, twisting half-truths into scandals. Influencers were paid to drag my name. Podcasts dissected my supposed rise to power. And late-night shows turned me into a punchline. They weren't just trying to discredit me, they were trying to humiliate me until I broke. Even worse, they weaponized technology against me again. Deep fakes of me surfaced online, fabricated videos of me flirting with strangers, whispering about using men for money. Each clip was crafted to erode credibility, to make the world laugh at me instead of believe me. I sat alone at my desk late at night, scrolling through the chaos. For a moment, I felt the weight pressing down, the tide threatening to swallow me whole. But then I remembered the recordings. I remembered the files they never thought I would keep. The next evening, I set up my camera. The red light blinked on, steady and unyielding. My reflection appeared on the live stream, raw and unscripted. "I know what you've seen," I began, my voice steady despite the storm outside. But lies only hold power when the truth stays silent. Tonight, I'm done being silent. One by one, I released the files. The smug laughter of my mother-in-law calling me a housemaid, the sneers of my sister-in-law mocking my erasure. And then, the most damning of all, the recording of my husband discussing market manipulation, planning to distort stock prices, conspiring with his father to cheat their investors. The comments section exploded, the stream spreading like wildfire. "Are you hearing this? Is this real? She has receipts." Viewers poured in by the tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. I leaned closer to the camera, my eyes cold. "You wanted to erase me, but now the world can see exactly who you are." The live stream ended with silence, but not the kind they had forced on me. This silence was theirs, a stunned, suffocating void left by the collapse of their control. And I knew then, the long con had only just begun. The backlash from my live stream had been nuclear. Headlines screamed across every platform. The Millers caught manipulating markets. Wife exposes dynasty's dark secrets. Their name, once polished like marble, began to crack under the heat of exposure. But for me, the chaos birthed clarity. I could no longer wait for someone else to defend my existence. If they wanted me erased, I would build something impossible to delete. Guardian AI had been a concept gathering dust in boardrooms and investor pitches for years, dismissed by skeptics who laughed at the idea of identity protection software. Now, with deep fakes spiraling into a global menace, it was time to set it free. Standing on a stage in San Francisco, I unveiled it to the world. Cameras flashed as I introduced Guardian AI, a system designed to detect, flag, and remove manipulated images and videos. My voice carried with an edge sharpened by personal scars. "When someone tries to erase you," I told the audience, "this technology ensures you stay seen. No one deserves to have their life rewritten." Applause thundered. The timing was perfect, almost poetic. My own suffering had become the proof of its necessity. Investors who once dismissed me now leaned forward, eager to be part of the solution. Governments called within days, eager to implement it for security, while advocacy groups hailed it as a lifeline for victims of online abuse. Guardian AI wasn't just a company, it became a movement. Hashtags shifted in my favor. One Guardian AI. Protect the truth. Stand with Jessica. Within weeks, the startup was valued in the billions. People no longer saw me as a victim, but as a pioneer who had turned humiliation into innovation. Late one evening, as I sat at my desk reviewing contracts, an email popped up. The subject line, cover story opportunity. Forbes. They wanted me on the next issue, a full feature titled The Phoenix Woman. I stared at the screen, a slow exhale leaving my chest. For so long, they had tried to erase me from every frame, every photo, every corner of memory. And now, my face would stare from the glossy cover of a magazine stacked on newsstands around the world. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I simply let the weight of the moment sink in. This was not vindication. It was transformation. While my star rose, the Miller empire burned. The first cracks came when journalists they had once bought turned on them, sensing blood in the water. Stories surfaced about offshore accounts, unpaid taxes, and bribes hidden in charitable donations. Documentaries aired late at night, exposing the family's gilded facade as nothing more than rot wrapped in gold. The shareholders, once loyal, fled like rats from a sinking ship. I was in New York preparing for the Forbes cover shoot when the collapse accelerated. Calls and texts from acquaintances poured in. "Did you see the stock price?" "The Millers are finished." News tickers blared across every screen in Times Square. Miller Industries plummets amid scandal. I stood before the mirror in the studio, a stylist adjusting the collar of my blazer. My reflection looked back at me, steady and composed, but I could feel the storm swirling behind my eyes. This was not just about revenge anymore. It was about survival and dominance. As I posed for the camera, flash after flash exploding like fireworks, my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, assuming it was another congratulatory message, but it wouldn't stop. Finally, I glanced down at the screen. It was him, my husband. I let it ring once, twice before answering. His voice came through broken, stripped of the arrogance I had once known. "Jess," he breathed, desperation leaking through every syllable. "Only you can stop this collapse." I stood frozen in the studio, lights blazing around me. For months he had stood against me, mocking me, erasing me, orchestrating my humiliation. And now, with everything crumbling, he reached for me like a drowning man clutching at air. The irony was exquisite. For the first time, he needed me more than I ever needed him. I lowered the phone slowly, my lips curving into a smile that no camera could ever capture. This was no longer just my survival. It was my rebirth. Success has a way of turning into a mirror you can't escape. Every headline with my name felt like both a triumph and a trap. Guardian AI was everywhere. Governments, corporations, advocacy groups were lining up to use it. Forbes called me a visionary, a survivor, a phoenix who had risen from the ashes of humiliation. But the spotlight is cruel. It doesn't just illuminate, it magnifies every crack, every shadow. My life, once erased, was now dissected under a microscope. Paparazzi followed me down the street, hungry for flaws. Reporters camped outside my apartment, shouting questions about my marriage, my past, my every move. The same world that had cheered my rebellion now demanded a new spectacle. Blood, scandal, something to feed on. It didn't take long for the vultures to arrive. A familiar face appeared on a late-night interview. Claire, a woman I had once called my closest friend. We had started in finance together, sharing cheap wine and bigger dreams. Now she sat under studio lights with a cold smile. She betrayed everything we believed in, Claire told the interviewer. Jessica always cared more about climbing than loyalty. She sold herself for power, and now she's pretending to be some kind of hero. The clip went viral within hours. Old acquaintances crawled out of the woodwork, some selling stories to tabloids, others fabricating tales of betrayal. Every headline screamed the same message. Maybe Jessica wasn't a phoenix after all. Maybe she was just another opportunist wrapped in glamour. But the cruelest twist came from the very technology I had sworn to fight. Someone uploaded a video that appeared to show me admitting my rise was orchestrated, that I had manipulated Guardian AI for personal gain. The voice was mine. The face was mine. But I knew instantly it was another deep fake. The timing was perfect. devastatingly so. Within a day, a new hashtag trended worldwide. Is Jessica real? Conspiracy theories flooded TikTok and Twitter. Some claimed I was a fabrication entirely, a synthetic creation designed to push AI propaganda. Others insisted I had been replaced long ago, that the real Jessica had vanished. I watched it spiral with a hollow ache. The very nightmare that had birthed Guardian AI had returned, stronger than before, aimed directly at me. It wasn't just an attack on my reputation. It was a direct attempt to erase my humanity all over again. I told myself I had faced worse, that I could weather this storm too. But in the quiet of my apartment, with screens glowing around me, I felt the edges of my identity blur. If enough people believed the lies, would it matter that they weren't true? Then came the revelation that shattered everything. The envelope arrived late at night, slid beneath my door. My heart raced as I tore it open, fingers trembling against the paper. Inside was a thick folder marked simply confidential. I spread the contents across the table: financial records, email transcripts, strategy documents. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself into a horrifying truth. The mastermind behind the campaign to erase me wasn't just my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, or even the family dynasty as a whole. It was my husband. From the very beginning, he had orchestrated the deepfakes, the smear campaigns, the silence. He had built the narrative of me as an intruder, not because he believed it, but because he needed to protect the illusion of a flawless family legacy. By painting me as disposable, he positioned himself as the savior, the rightful heir to the Miller Empire. Every attack I endured, every humiliation I swallowed, every piece of myself erased, it had all been part of his design. My hand shook as I flipped through the final document, a memo written in his own words. Erase her completely before she destabilizes the narrative. I sank into the chair, breath ragged, the room spinning around me. Betrayal has many faces, but the cruelest is the one that once whispered love in the dark. He hadn't just abandoned me to his family's cruelty. He had weaponized it, using me as a pawn in his pursuit of power. And now, when I had grown too strong, too dangerous, he had unleashed a final strike, turning my own identity into a question mark. But as the rage swelled in my chest, a different fire burned beneath it. He had underestimated me once before. He thought I would crumble when they erased me from their photographs. He thought I would vanish when the world mocked me as a fraud. This time, he would see what happened when a phoenix refused to be ashes again. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, my resolve hardening with every page. He wanted to erase me, but I was done playing his game. The world loves a reckoning, and I decided mine would not be whispered in shadows but declared beneath the brightest light possible. The invitations went out in silence, the arrangements made with meticulous care. What I planned was not revenge, it was liberation. The conference hall in Geneva was a cathedral of glass and steel, cameras lined across the walls like watchful eyes. Leaders, journalists, and activists filled the seats, their murmurs rising like restless waves. Millions more tuned in from their screens across the world. When I stepped onto the stage, the silence hit like a physical force. I didn't waste words. With a single click, the giant screen behind me lit up. The first video played, my mother-in-law, her laughter sharp as she called me a housemaid with a certificate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Next came my sister-in-law bragging about editing me out of photographs. Then my husband's voice, cold and deliberate, instructing, erase her completely before she destabilizes the narrative. Each clip landed like a hammer blow. The audience shifted from shock to outrage, their expressions tightening with disbelief and fury. Social media exploded in real time, hashtags flooding the screen faster than they could be counted. Jessica speaks where erase the erasure, where our truth revealed. But I wasn't finished. The final file appeared, his signed directive, the document that had arrived in the confidential envelope, his betrayal in ink, undeniable. The lights seemed to burn hotter as I stood beneath them, the evidence of years of cruelty blazing behind me. "This," I said into the silence, "is what erasure looks like. When those with power believe they can rewrite your existence. When family becomes the enemy and love becomes a weapon. They wanted me gone, but I am still here." The hall erupted in applause, but I lifted my hand, quieting them. My heart pounded with the weight of the moment, not because I wanted vengeance, but because I had to choose what came next. The world held its breath. And then I spoke again, softer this time. "I could destroy them. I have every reason to. But destruction leaves only ashes. I choose something greater." The cliffhanger stretched as though time itself paused. Millions watching from their screens leaned closer. What would I do with the power I held? I gave them my answer. I will not become what they are. Instead, I will fight for everyone who has ever been erased. Today, I am founding the Global Foundation for Digital Integrity, a place where women, men, anyone who has been silenced by manipulation, by deep fakes, by lies, can reclaim their identity. No one will suffer the way I did. The applause was thunderous now, unstoppable. Reporters stood, clapping furiously. Activists wept. Leaders rose to shake my hand. In that moment, the stage became something more than wood and steel. It became the ground on which I transcended the narrative they had written for me. Weeks later, the world knew me not just as Jessica Miller, the erased wife, but as the Phoenix Woman. Forbes ran the cover with that title, my face steady, unflinching, framed by flames of symbolism. The article told the story not of my humiliation, but of my rebirth. Back in Boston, in the crumbling Miller estate, that very issue of Forbes landed on the dining table. My husband, his empire reduced to rubble, stared at it with hollow eyes. My mother-in-law's hands shook as she tried to push it aside, but it slid back into view. My sister-in-law, once smug with triumph, now sat in silence. They could no longer crop me out. They could no longer replace me with someone else's face. This time, the world had seen me, and nothing they did could undo it. I had not destroyed them. I had risen above them, and in doing so, I had become untouchable. For me, the journey was never about being part of their legacy. It was about writing my own. And now, etched across the pages of history, across the screens of millions, my name could not be erased. Not anymore.